Welcome to the second of our three presentations this summer about street names in Cary. And those street names tell some of our history, not all of it, but a lot of it. And my name is Carla Michaels. I grew up here in Cary. Cary native. I serve on the board of the Friends of the Page Walker Hotel, which is our historical society here in town. And unfortunately, Barb Wetmore, who has worked with me on this project and this presentation, couldn't be here today. She's very sad. I think it's killing her not to be here, but we will soldier on anyway, so she's expecting great things. I also want to thank Jean Evans and Renee Coley Evans, Anita Bailey, and George Bailey. All those are Evans descendants. And they've helped with some of the Evans family details. I hope we got them right. I will stand corrected if not. But the Evans family has a really huge family tree here in this area with lots of branches. We'd love to know about any corrections, new information about any of the families that lived here in Cary. Just to let you know, we're constantly learning, and there's no better source than the people who live the history. So just hold on to that thought, and if you can possibly hold your comments or questions to the end. Otherwise, we will go off on amazing bunny trails that we may never come back from. Now, I will just give one little caveat here to begin with, and that is there is a lot of history about the Black community in Cary here that we can't cover. We can't possibly do it in an hour. So we're going to just hit some high spots. We're concentrating on street names, place names, church names today. And a little bit of a warning, as Barb and I were writing this up and organizing it, we couldn't decide what to leave out. It's a little bit long, and we didn't want to leave anything out, so it might go an hour. So if you feel like you need to stand up and stretch, or if you have to leave because you have to be somewhere else, I fully understand, but it's just because we couldn't decide what we wanted to take out the program. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. In the 1800s, 1/3 of Cary's population was made up of people of color. African American, Native American, and multiracial people. And some were free and had always been free. Some were formerly enslaved people. Some had been in Cary since before the Civil War. And some migrated from other states, some from Virginia, some from other counties in North Carolina. You'll hear about some of that. But like most of their fellow white citizens here in Cary, most of them were subsistence farmers just like white citizens. So I picked out a map to use. I picked a street map of Cary. It's from 1973, and the reason I did that was because it was fairly simple and small. Cary was pretty small back in 1973. When I graduated from high school, there were about 8,000 people in 1973, and now we're pushing 200,000 now, so it's pretty big. But so this simplifies things. That's the only reason I use a 73 map. But we're going to travel around Cary and talk about different communities of where Black people had homes and settled in the town of Cary. So we're going to start here with the Cornwall Road area. I have it circled on the map. Cornwall Road, if you go out front of the library and head down Kildare Farm Road, about a mile, you will cross Cornwall Road. So that's the area that we're talking about right now. And that was one of Cary's earliest places where free Blacks began to settle after the Civil War. This is a picture of a house on East Cornwall Road. So if you're heading out south down toward Holly Springs, East Cornwall Road will be on your left, and if you go right down there, you'll see this house, and that was the Simmons family. And it's one of the only homes still standing on Cornwall Road that was one of the Black households. Many families were still living along Cornwall Road in the mid-20th century, but Ed Simmons lived here. and Ed Simmons Court, as you can see on the street sign, and then a street named Bethania Court, or Bethania Place, is just around the corner from that house. Ed Simmons was the son of William and Bethania Simmons, who owned property in the area. And in doing research, we found that Ed's grandmother and William's mother was named Sarah, and she was enslaved by Frank Page, who was the founder of Cary. And you might wonder, well, how do you know that? In researching her, which we did this big research project with Cary First Christian Church for this walking tour brochure, please take one of them. We researched the Simmons family, and this is a marriage certificate. You might have trouble reading the handwriting, but this says William Simmons. Doc Simmons has applied for a license of marriage of William Simmons, age 21. He's the son of Henderson Simmons and Sarah Simmons, and he married Bethania Cotton. Then we also found in the newspaper there was an interview, and it was from this man. He said, "The elder Frank Page was one of the greatest citizens North Carolina ever produced." That was his opinion. William Simmons, a Negro man whose mother belonged to the Page family, remarked to me one day that wherever his old boss, Mr. Frank Page, went, he left his mark. Well, that brought the whole story together and puts a face and a name with one of the enslaved people who lived here in Cary. And so we felt like that was a really significant find for us, because so many of the enslaved people remain nameless, and we were able to assign a name and an identity to this particular person. This is a charming map that was drawn up, I think, in the 70s, based on the memories of Elva Templeton. And Elva Templeton was the daughter of Dr. James Templeton. He was a very beloved family doctor here in Cary in the 1800s and early 1900s. And he treated whites and blacks, rich and poor. He would take your payment, or if you didn't have the payment, he would treat you anyway. His daughter drew up this map of Cary from her recollection, and we really owe her a debt of gratitude, because not only did she put the white people on the map and where they lived, she put black people on the map and where they lived, and that has been really helpful to us in figuring out who lived where. So on this map, you'll see Bill Simmons is living here. That's Mr. William Simmons, and it's on Cornwall Road, so just right where we were talking about. But while we were researching William and Bethania Simmons, we found this interesting organization from an 1899 deed from the Simmons family to an organization called the Cary Nicolite Lodge of Colored Oddfellows. And you may have heard of the Oddfellows organization before, but this lodge was a member of the Grand United Order, and that was based in England. And they actually allowed black organizations of the Oddfellows to incorporate under their organization at a time when, if you tried to go through the independent order of Oddfellows, you were generally unsuccessful. It was, just the way they were able to incorporate. And on this map, it does say Masonic Hall here, but I think Miss Elva was just confused. Both of them are fraternal organizations. And so it shows that there was that Masonic Hall fraternal organization where the deed that we found places it. So I thought that was kind of interesting. We haven't found any other information about this particular organization, but we did find the deed. And if you go to Cary First Christian Church, there are a couple of headstones that have the 3 links of the Order of the Oddfellows. Sometimes you'll see within the links there will be F, L, and T, and that stands for friendship, love, and truth. So sometimes you will see those on the headstones of people who belong to that fraternal organization. And then I just clipped the piece of the deed that showed that it was William Simmons and wife to the Cary Nicolite Lodge. So that kind of brings it all together. So let's explore just a little bit more around the Kildare Farm Road area. We'll go on here. So this was the section of the map that we were looking at just a minute ago. This is Mr. Simmons and this is the lodge. But this down below is an aerial view from 1959 that shows that Miss Elva, got the shape of the road right, and I kind of tried to line it up here. The street that goes from side to side is Cornwall Road, which still exists today, and down here circled in yellow is the cemetery. So it is that far down Cornwall Road. Now, if you've been down Cornwall Road, you know that Glen Air, the retirement facility is there. Glen Air takes up like this whole area in here. And if you'll notice here, this is all farmland. It's now a shopping center and apartments and the new Glen Air high-rise and all of that. It's really changed quite a lot since it was just farmland in 1959. Down there, where the cemetery is the first meeting place of Cary First Christian Church and their cemetery. About 1868, the church started holding worship services under a brush harbor or a brush arbor on the land where they have been burying their beloved family members since 1866 or so. And we also recently learned that they actually worshiped under a kind of a tent structure at one time as well. Now, the cemetery does exist. It's still owned and cared for, and it's actually an active burial ground, which is owned by Cary First Christian Church Cemetery members. The Friends worked with church members during COVID to develop a walking tour brochure. We could meet by Zoom, and we could do all the research on the internet without having to, while still being socially distant during that period of time. And so what the brochure does is tell the stories of the people and the family groups who are buried in that cemetery. The cemetery is open to the public. There are usually the brochures in a little box at the gate of the cemetery, but I brought a handful here today. So if you want one and want to go down Kildare Farm Road to Cornwall Road, you turn right and head down the street, and it will be on your right. It's just a kind of a stone's throw from here. The discussion about the church leads us to another street called Holloman Street or Cemetery Road. This is another portion of that map that was hand-drawn based on the memories of Elder Templeton. And the congregation continued to hold services under the brush arbor and tent until 1883, when they moved their location. You can see they moved from here's the cemetery, they moved down here to the church. So they just moved kind of around the corner. And it was on this road called Cemetery Road. And the road was first named that. It was later called Holloman Street, which we discovered in looking at some old maps. And Charles Holloman was a white farmer who owned land in that area. And so they named the road for him. The road, if you've noticed, if you've gone down Kildare Farm Road, you might see they're doing a lot of construction behind Cary Elementary School. There's a lot of gravel there now. They're cutting a lot of trees. And some people are going, you're cutting down all the trees. But what they're actually doing is they're restoring the original road. It will be part of the Higgins Greenway that leads up to Hillcrest Cemetery, and then it'll go around the cemetery and keep going as part of the Greenway. So they're actually restoring that area to what it looked like before. And once it's restored and the Greenway is complete, the town of Cary designed a sign that tells the history of the church and the school. And there, it's a large panel like this that has pictures on it and tells the history of that area. It's in Hillcrest Cemetery right now, sort of placeholding until the Greenway is done, and then they'll move it down to face the site where the church and the school actually work. So I'm really excited about that. I think that'll be great to be able to walk down that stretch of history that is so rich. This is another thing I found. In looking at the aerial map from 1959, this on the left here, right here, is Hillcrest Cemetery. This is the road. This is Cemetery Road. And this is a picture of the actual church that was on Holloman Street for the Black congregation. And you can see it right there. It's a bird's eye view down there, but you can see that that's the church itself. So I thought that was really, really neat that the aerial photography from 1959 was able to get that good a shot of how the church sat and the area around it. Keep in mind that the church, the school beside it wasn't there at the time, because part of the story is that the church burned in 1936. So this is 1959, so that's 20 years after the school had burned. Back to Holloman Street, although the church worshipped there earlier, in 1895, Frank Page, who we just mentioned, sold a 1 acre lot for $1 to the trustees of Cary First Christian Church. And so that officially belonged to them. And we know that African American children were attending the public Cary, it was called the Cary Colored School, and it was located right next to the church on the same road. Like I said, it burned in 1936. It was later moved across town, and it's known as Kingswood Elementary today. So you might recognize that name. It's north of Town Hall. And we'll talk about that move a little bit later on, but what I want to do now is talk about a couple of the teachers at the school. Now, although the streets there aren't any streets named for these two ladies, but they were really notable teachers of the era, of the period, and Dora Stroud and Ada Ruffin taught students at this school. And if you recall where Charlie Holloman lived, Miss Elva had made a note of a family called Shade Ruffin and his wife, and then he listed Ada Ruffin as the daughter. So she lived very close to where the school was. This is Franklinton Christian College. And why am I talking about Franklinton Christian College up in Franklinton, North Carolina? It was established for Black ministerial and teacher training, among other subjects, and it operated from the 1870s until it closed during the Great Depression. And both Ada Ruffin graduated there in 1906, and you can see her name right there. She's listed as from Cary. And then Dora Stroud graduated in 1908. Both taught at that school along with Reverend John Meadows. He was a pastor of Cary First Christian Church, and he served as the school's principal too. So the Strouds, the Meadows, and the Ruffins were pillars of the Black community, and both ladies taught students over a long educational period for them. Before we leave church history, I wanted to talk about another church. So we're up here in the Kingswood area. We were down here in Cornwall, and now we're going up. See, Town Hall is right about in here, so we're just a little bit north of Town Hall. So at the same time, Black citizens were holding their worship services on Holloman Street, or even earlier on Cornwall Road, others were starting to hold worship services in a small wooden structure off Farrell Street. Farrell Street is within the circle there, and became known as Mount Zion Missionary Baptist Church, and it relocated to the corner of North Academy Street and Chapel Hill Road in 1918, it said, my research said. So that's what the church looked like. It's no longer there. But in the summer of 1968, Ella Williams Vinson was one of 3 women who traveled around Cary in hopes of convincing parents of Black children to join a new preschool. And she was instrumental in establishing the first preschool in town for Black children, which opened that fall, 1968, with 13 students. And it was at Mount Zion Baptist Church. She went on to be a lifelong educator in Cary and a documenter of Black history in Cary. She wrote 2 books, both sides of the tracks, part 1 and then part 2. And those are really wonderful resources. They're full of pictures and full of information about just her travels through the history of her family and the people that she knew. I don't know that they're still being published. Peggy, where's Peggy? There you are. Are those books still being published? Do you know? No, I don't think so. They're hard to find, but if you have a chance to get your hands on them, they're really worth the time to read them. So back to the church here. This is Mount Zion Church today. It moved from the corner of Academy and Chapel Hill Road is sort of tucked in behind Chapel Hill Road and Evans Road now. And it located there in 2007, and it's on Allen Lewis Drive. And Allen Lewis is one of the pastors who served their congregation for 22 years, 1979 to 2001. So if you see Allen Lewis Drive, you know that he was a pastor of their church for a long time. But we're going to go back over to Kingswood because we didn't finish with the streets over there. This is a photo of Union Bethel AME Church, which is on North Academy Street. It was at one time known as the Blake Church because Reverend Addison Blake and his wife Mintie Blake, or Mintia, it shows there, Blake, they were established the church in 1898, and the general area was known as Blake Hill for obvious reasons. So it's the only one of 4 historic Black churches in Cary that's in its original site. It hadn't moved an inch since 1898, so I think that's pretty much a distinction. And I just took that picture the other day, so it's, you know, it's lovely. I love the red door. Now, only 3 of the historic churches have active congregations. So if anybody knows about the church I'm getting ready to mention, we would love his information on that. The 4th church really is kind of a mystery. It's called Zion Methodist Church. Now, the other one's Mount Zion Baptist Church, but this one, I found it on a 1929 map of Cary, and it just said Zion Methodist Church in the same general area, but I have not been able to find any bit of information about it. So if anybody can give me any hints, I would be happy to accept those. So in that Kingswood area also is Boyd Street. Boyd Street is in that neighborhood. Blacks started acquiring land in that area in the late 1800s and early 1900s. It's named for an early pastor of Cary First Christian Church. His name was Isaac Boyd, and we're just so blessed to have pictures, you know, to put names and faces together. He and his family came from Granville County to Cary sometime after 1880, and he raised 10 children here in town. And several of his family members are buried in the Cary First Christian Church Cemetery. Now, how do we know that he came after 1880? Well, we found a Granville County census from 1880 that shows Isaac Boyd and his family, and then there was no 1890 census. It got destroyed, so we were out of luck. You know, everybody's out of luck there. So then in 1900, he's here at Cary. So sometime during that 20-year period, he arrived in the Cary area. Now, Oliver Wendell Arrington. Arrington is another important name in Black history in Cary. So Oliver Wendell Arrington operated a store on the street, and this is a picture of it. It was called the Boys Club. And you can just barely see that. I tried to work with the photo so you could read that, but it was called the Boys Club. He sold snacks, ice cream, staples, and he also had a jukebox. Actually, it sounded like a pretty fun place to go. Young people in the area would frequent it. Also in this area is Kingswood Elementary School. So this is a closer up view of that. It still doesn't list the street names, but Farrell, Johnson, and Boyd Street are all within that circle around Kingswood. Kingswood, like I mentioned a little bit ago, it really owes its roots and existence to the Black families who lived in this area in the early part of the 20th century. So when the Cary Colored School burned on Holloman Street in 1936, the proposal was for the Black school children, like 1st through 7th graders, to get on a bus and ride it to Medford. There was a Black school in Medford. And it was like, I wouldn't have done that. I mean, I just think that's too much for young children to go that far on the bus, you know, at that age. So the parents understandably objected to that plan, and you could certainly understand why they would. So they boycotted, and the families of the neighborhood organized, and formed a committee for the new elementary school in the colored community. That's what they called it. They organized, and fortunately, Golett Arrington, remember I said the Arringtons were an important name, and his sister, Emily Arrington Jones, donated land for the school. And then people in the community donated money. They built a 5-wood wooden structure and established Cary Elementary School for colored children through their community engagement. It was so interesting because the school, from what I researched, drew children from other communities to it. I mean, it was brand new. It attracted children from the Shiloh community, which is north of Morrisville, Ramcat, which is in the Swift Creek area, Asbury, which is out near Cooper's Furniture, and even from Method, which is where they were trying to send the Cary children to. Even children from Method came to Cary. And that's near Meredith College, in case you're not familiar with that. So the school opened in 1937, and then it was expanded in the 1950s and 60s on land sold to Wake County Public School System by Ernest Bunn Farrell and his wife, Lovey Johnson Farrell. So this is what it looks like today, and it's got this huge name, Kingswood Montessori STEM Magnet Elementary. We just call it Kingswood, just for simplification. Farrell Street and Johnson Street in the Kingswood neighborhood are named for those Farrell and Johnson families who donated land for Kingswood, for the school. Now, in the same general area is this, I found this map in the Register of Deeds that was dated 1945, and it is an extension of Johnson Street. This today is Johnson Street, and it comes all the way down to, this says NC Highway, what does that say? 70, actually Highway 70 used to run right through Cary, but it's Chapel Hill Road now. This was called Harlem Heights, and nobody had ever heard that reference before. If you'll notice, there was a lake, Lake Harlem, there, and there were lots of lots. I would think that they look really long and skinny, so maybe you had to buy 2 of them, you know, put your house in the middle of it or something. But a lot of these up here, I think, have houses built onto them. But as you get down here, it becomes more businesses. If you're familiar with that stretch of road, there's like Maximilian's Club, and Pupsy used to be there, and you know, there was an auto repair place and all that, so it kind of had a more industrial kind of feel to it. When I was researching the Farrell name, you know, I did a Google search of Farrell Street, Cary, and up popped a Zillow reference, and it was to a house that was on Farrell Street that was for sale. And the legal description showed Harlem Heights. So I was really surprised by that, because I had been totally unfamiliar with that, and nobody I've talked to was familiar with it, but it was named, and it still continues to carry that name here in the town of Cary, even if it's kind of buried below layers of documents and that kind of thing. About the time that blacks were establishing farms and churches along Cornwall Road in the Kingswood area, the Evans family was making its way to Cary from Chatham County. The Evans family was a free family of multiracial background originating in Virginia. But to set part of the stage for the Evans family, let's take a short detour to a place called Friendship. How many people know Friendship in Apex? Yes, it's got a big high school down there now. Heather Lee, if you watch WRAL or read their news online, you might be familiar with Heather Lee. She's a multi-platform producer for WRAL, and she did this really big article about Friendship and explained that Friendship was a community of black, white, and brown people who agreed to live in peace side by side prior to the Civil War. It was built on the crossroads of 2 major stagecoach roads. One led from Raleigh to Haywood, so it went from Raleigh southwest down into Chatham County to Haywood. and the other one started in Durham and went southeast to Smithfield. So where those two roads crossed was where Friendship was. So there were free people of color living alongside the white families who might have had enslaved people. There were white families who didn't have slaves living along black people who were still enslaved. The Tuscarora tribe was already occupying the land in that area, and some of those indigenous families lived in Friendship as well. So it was, quite racially mixed. And the oral tradition of Friendship's history goes like this, Heather said. A member of the Tuscarora tribe who moved into the area in the 1840s, decades before racial segregation was brought to an end, helped organize a traditional powwow for the leaders of the community. According to the story, they all smoked a peace pipe and agreed to live in harmony or in friendship. So out of this environment came a matriarch of the Evans family, Native American Vermel Stewart Evans, the wife of Clyde Evans Sr., who, and he himself had Native American roots and ancestors back in Virginia. I think I got that right. But the patriarch of the family was Charles Evans, and he married Matilda, and this is a lovely picture of Matilda here. And her mother, Nancy Marsh, and Matilda are over here. And Charles and Matilda had a son named Otis Norfleet, or his nickname was Nafi Evans, and this is a picture of him in the middle. They married in 1877, began purchasing land in Cary in the late 1800s and early 1900s. And they had a number of children, and one of them was Nafi Evans. In the early 1900s, Matilda and Charles and their son Nafi purchased land from Mary Irvin. And she was a formerly enslaved woman, and they bought it near today's Old Apex Road and High House Road in that area. And we know that she had been enslaved because the marriage records from 1858 show her as an emancipated slave. So I was able to find her marriage record. This is the whole thing up top, but I enlarged the important parts down below. And it showed that Mary C. Irvin and Cary Irvin were man and wife. This was the date, December 28, 1858. They were from Lake County, and she was an emancipated slave. And it's so interesting to find information like that in seemingly unrelated documents. But I have seen this before on marriage licenses of Wake County. You can go on Ancestry and find those kind of records. It's not unique, but it's not often that you find that. And it was good to find that, so we know a little bit about Mary Irvin. Anyway, she herself, in her name, had purchased the land from the Raleigh Cooperative Land and Building Association. That's the RCLBA. And that was a lending corporation in Raleigh. And I'm going off on a little bit of a bunny trail here, but it was really interesting. It was one of the number of lending corporations that helped free men buy land and build houses. It was started by James H. Harris, and he was one of the leading black politicians in North Carolina and in Wake County. He was born in Granville County as a slave. He earned his freedom, and then he became an upholsterer. He traveled to Ohio, where he studied 2 years at Oberlin College, and he returned to Raleigh, was instrumental in establishing the Freedmen's Village of Oberlin Village. And we hopefully you know where that is and the importance to Black history of Oberlin Village. He served on the Raleigh Board of Aldermen. He ran for various political offices, and his association only lasted for about 10 years. But within that 10 years, Mary Irvin was able to buy the land here in Cary and then sell it on to the Evans family. The Evans family bought this land and they developed Duchess Village. This is a sign, I took the sign the other day, and this is a picture of the Bailey 3. The land was eventually developed by Matilda and Charles's grandsons, Herbert George and Ray Bailey, along with their parents, Joe and Mamie Evans Bailey. And their company was known as the Bailey III Development Corporation, and streets in Dutchess Village are named for members of the Bailey family. We have Bay Oak Drive, which was derived from the Bailey name, Thincia Court, Joel Court, Cobb Court, and Vermel Court. And Vermel is she's the descendant of Native American Stewart family that helped form the village of Friendship. And so there are Evans family members, we understand, that still live in Dutchess Village today. So that's really neat. They've got that history there. The nearby privately owned Turner Evans Cemetery, isn't that a good picture? On Old Apex Road is the resting place of the Turners and the Evans. Now they intermarried. Etta Evans married Willis Turner and was the first person buried in this private cemetery. It's on Old Apex Road. The Turner house down below, I just took these pictures the other day, beautiful day, and the house is standing on Old Apex Road between the roundabout on West Chatham Street and the railroad track. So it's in there, and it's a beautiful home, very well maintained by whoever owns it now. But we're glad there's that reference to the Turner family that's still in that area. Now we're going to travel up a little bit from Dutchess Village up to the Evans Road area. The earliest Evans landowner in this area, from what we could tell, was James Lovelace Evans, who bought land in the Evans Road area in 1927. Now, if you've been on Evans Road lately, you know it's like 5 lanes, it's paved, it's beautiful, but that was not the Evans Road of early days. It was simply a dirt road. Most of the roads in Cary were dirt roads for a long time, but it remained unpaved after Cary undertook to pave other roads and streets in town. So, decades after the land was born, a group of people were instrumental in advocating for paving Evans Road. Now, we know of 3 of them: Ruth Morgan Evans, who was the wife of Clyde Evans Jr., Jeanette Evans, wife of Herbert Evans, and Ralph Sorrell. Now, how did the Sorrell get in there? Well, Ralph was a white postman, and he delivered mail on State Route 1653, which was a rural route at the time. And so, along with all the family members who had to live on the road all the time, and he traveled up and down it as a postman, he had an interest in getting the road paved too. So they all worked together. The Evans family really spearheaded the effort to get that road paved. And they finally did. They collected names, they did a petition, and once it was paved, it became Evans Road for the family members who lived in the area. But I did want to mention Jeanette Evans and Dorcas. Jeanette's first community action was helping to get Evans Road paved, but another major accomplishment that she had was helping to found Christian Community in Action. And that was along with Margaret Keller and others in 1968. It had such an impact on Cary citizens, and it still does today. You may be familiar with Dorcas Ministries, Christian Community in Action. How many know where the Dorcas shop is? Yeah. One of the cool places in town. But you know what is really a hub of services that really helps our community members who are in need. And if you want to hear Jeanette's story in her own voice or read her words, you can go onto the Friends of the Page Walker website and go to Oral Histories, and you can hear it. You can also hear Clyde Evans Jr., you can hear Miss Sally Jones and other members of the Black community who, our own Peggy Van Scoyoc, raise your hand, Peggy, yay! She's our oral historian, and she sits down with people and records their stories. So if you know of people who would like to tell their story of growing up in Cary, some aspect of it or whatever they want to tell, we can get you hooked up with Miss Peggy, and she will do that, and it will be on our website. What a wonderful service. So anyway, you can hear her story. In 1939, Vernell Evans, wife of Clyde Evans Sr., purchased 100 acres from the North Carolina Joint Stock Land Bank of Durham. Joint stock land banks were chartered under the authority of the Federal Farm Loan Act of 1916, and they were another way to help people buy land and establish their homes. And in a tribute to her mother, Mamie Evans Bailey wrote, "It was Vermel who helped my father locate and buy the family farm of 100 acres. She had many dreams of this place before locating the actual site. She alone located the owner and made the appointment to buy the land. It was a major step for our family and the future of her children. The land has helped her children to maintain their livelihood." So Clyde Evans Sr., pictured there, began farming the land, and over time he sold acreage to siblings and cousins and friends. Clyde Evans Jr. said of his father, "My father was a great land lover. Daddy wanted to build a town for people not fortunate to have any land to build on. And many of these land purchasers were sharecroppers, and that meant that they didn't own the land that they worked on. So by selling parcels of land to these men and women, Mr. Evans accomplished his goal of helping the less fortunate to escape poverty by building their own homes on their own land." That's a real testament. In searching in newspapers, I found a picture of Mr. Evans and his dog Cece. He was a farmer and he had a tractor, and he could be seen around Cary as he drove his tractor to downtown Cary on a regular basis. Now, that trip might have been doable in 1972 with about 7,000 people in town. This is from Wednesday, September 27, 1972. How about if he tried that today on the traffic on Chapel Hill Road? I think there would be a bit of a kerfuffle out there. But anyway, this was just, I love the fact that somebody took the time to take a picture of that. And in the background, it gives a little bit of, he is parked near the railroad tracks on Academy Street. You see, there looks like a fire truck here. The fire station used to be on the corner by the railroad tracks. And then here's Hobbies Appliances, is where the kitchen and bath gallery is now. So if you can see, your back's to the railroad tracks and you're looking south on Academy Street. So the face and the dog and the tractor's great, but what's in the background is important too. That's why I like pictures of around town. We're gonna move on and talk about some of the land and the names of the streets in the Evans Road area. Now, some of the land that Mr. Evans farmed eventually became Evans Estates, and it became subdivisions that the Baileys would develop. But as children became adults, Clyde Sr. and Vermel would give each one of them a piece of land to build their home, to get their start. But at the time of Mr. Evans' death in 1986, there were still 60-plus acres still owned by the Evans family. I mean, that's a huge amount of land. So members of the Evans and Bailey families still own and reside on land on Evans Road in these subdivisions that are part of this overall community today. My friend Barb and I had a good time riding around last weekend and going through all these subdivisions and taking pictures of the signs and that kind of thing. So we'll get to those in just a minute. This is one of them. Not only did Mr. Evans provide land for families, but a group of family members of the Evans family, James Lovelace Evans, Herbert Evans, and Ratter Evans Green and their spouses sold land to the Wake County school system to build a high school for African Americans in 1963. Now, in 1965, 2 years after Cary High School had begun this whole desegregation process in town, West Cary High School opened up on Evans Road. And if you've been down Evans Road and seen West Cary Middle School, it looks very much the same as this picture from an old newspaper. It opened on Evans Road as Cary's first all-black segregated high school. 1 year later, in 1966, Barry O'Kelly High School in Method closed. So Cary students who hadn't transferred to Barry O'Kelly, they were at Cary High School, and then others came back and joined them there. Other students were bused from Method, Morrisville, Jeffreys Grove, Millbrook, Millbrook's a long way away, Ramcat, down Swift Creek, Bayleaf, New, St. Matthews, and Asbury to fill up this new high school. I mean, that's a lot. That's a lot of transportation going on there. So just a little bit of background on the whole desegregation process. We can do a whole program on that. Katie does do programs on that. But just to give you just a general feel of what was going on at the time on Evans Road, Cary submitted a proposed desegregation report to, remember it was called Department of Health, Education, and Welfare for a long time. HEW is now HHS. They submitted that report in 1966, but it didn't meet the standards of the federal government. So Henry Adams, who was the son of J.P.H. Adams and his wife Cora, and J.P.H. Adams had been one of the early white citizens of Cary who sold land in the Kingswood area to black families. So Henry Adams, his son, and the Cary Advisory Council developed a new plan, and it was the first of its kind in the country. The plan was to convert this high school, which was only 2 years old and was segregated, to a 9th grade school only for all the races beginning in 1967. And the Wake County School Board thought that was a great idea. They approved the plan. So in 1967-68, West Cary became a fully desegregated all 9th grade school, and it had 340 students, and then it became West Cary Junior High School. Now, some of the white parents were not happy about that. They filed a lawsuit. It went all the way up to the North Carolina Supreme Court. It was thrown out. But in the meantime, school was going on in the school. The school opened in the fall of 1967, and they gave parents freedom of choice. You don't have to send your kids there. But only 4 students requested transfer out of the school. I went there in 1969. I was there at the 9th grade only, and it was a great school, and I really enjoyed my year at West Cary Junior High. Because that plan was so successful, at least administratively, the Cary Advisory Council applied it again in 1969 when East Cary Elementary became fully desegregated, all 6th grade school, and then it was the name was changed to Kingswood. So that's where the Kingswood name came in, was when it became a 6th grade school. So then all Cary schools were desegregated in the 1969-1970 school year. I've talked in other programs about the difficulties of that integration process. It was hard for a lot of the black students, and we recognize that, but I think Cary was trying to lead the way in resolving the issue and get them desegregated, and we did. We will move on from that. We're going to move right down the street and across the street to Cary First Christian Church. Remember, it started at the cemetery, and then it moved to Holloman Street, and then it moved to Evans Road. That was Clyde Evans Sr. It was 1.14 acres of land. I just looked at that deed this morning on the Register of Deeds to Cary First Christian Church in the 1960s after they outgrew the church on Holloman Street. So the members built a new sanctuary and fellowship hall, and they worship there today. And the bell and the cornerstone from the old churches are there, and I just threw in a picture of the bell because I think it's so neat. It's in the back of the church, so you would have to drive around into the parking lot to see it, but it's a lovely testament to their history. Now, on to the subdivisions along Evans Road. There's a lot of them. First of all, we briefly mentioned Evans Estates. So a couple of those streets, well, let's see. First of all, I'll back up and I'll say that it was owned, developed, and built by George Bailey and Herbert Bailey, who were grandsons of Clyde and Vermel Evans. And some portion of the original Evans farm was given to them by their mother, Mamie Evans Bailey, daughter of Clyde and Vermel. And some of the land was independently purchased by Herbert Bailey from other family members. So about 35 of the 51 homes in the subdivision were built by George Bailey. And so Anita Way is Herbert's wife, so she has a street named after her. And then there's Telia Point. And Telia was Telia Stewart, who was the mother of Vermel Stewart Evans. So it does have some history behind that name. So what the name? So we'll move on then to Bailey's Creek subdivision. So in that area, there's Bailey's Creek, and that was named for Joseph and Mamie Evans Bailey, the parents of the landowners, George and Herbert Bailey, and the siblings. And again, it was given to them by their mother Mamie, part of the Evans farm. Sally, as Mamie became known, was quite a remarkable woman. She was driven by a deep desire not to settle for the status quo. So let me tell you something that we found out recently about Mamie. She presented a convincing argument to her parents to go to Portsmouth, Virginia to find work where her brother was living. She became a certified welder at the Norfolk Naval Shipyard. That is so cool. She was Cary's own Rosie the Riveter, I guess. So she riveted a lot of steel sheets onto the aircraft carriers USS Shangri-La, Lake Champlain, and the Tarawa. And I'm not sure, but I think that might be the Tarawa right there. She met her husband Joe, an Army corporal who had been born in Goldsboro, North Carolina on a fine day, and the two were married in 1944. He founded a plumbing company in Raleigh and was a partner in several other companies. He was a very successful, highly regarded businessman in the area. Together, they managed their businesses and raised their 5 children. She attended college while helping her husband and raising their children. And she graduated from college the year her oldest child graduated from high school. And then she went on to teach 2nd grade. That is a great story, isn't it? From the shipyards of Norfolk Naval Shipyard to the 2nd grade teaching class. I love that story. So Bailey Creek names. Anita Way, it continues on from the other subdivision. And then there's Matilda Point. We saw a picture of Matilda earlier, but this is a picture of her in later life. She was the matriarch of the Greater Evans family. And then we go to Bailey Court. Herbert Bailey is here today. There he is. Hello, Mr. Bailey. You're looking good. Okay, so Bailey Court subdivision is owned by Herbert Bailey, the oldest grandson of Clyde and Vermel Evans, and the oldest son of Joseph and Mamie Bailey. And the land, as I've said before, was part of the original Evans farm and named for the family Bailey family. So here, well, let's see. I need to back up. I'm going to leave it right there. I did not put these names on the slide, but there's Bailey Park Lane, named for the Bailey family. Patterson Court. Patterson is the maiden name of Anita Patterson Bailey, and the middle name of their youngest grandson, Evan Patterson Bailey. And then there's Herbert's Corner. You know, once you get started, they all start to make sense, right? Are any of these other people in the room? Yes. Okay. We're so glad you could join us. Bailey's Grove, owned and developed by Herbert Bailey. The land was originally a part of the Evans farm. It was initially sold to the Walden family, their cousins in with the Evanses and the Stewarts, and then later purchased by Herbert Bailey. And you can see Sandman's Cove is Joseph Herbert Bailey II here. No, it was that was the nickname. Sandman was a nickname given to Joseph II by his grandfather. So you can see that the Evans family has had and continues to have an important impact on Cary history from very early days. We're going to wrap up our little tour around town with Frogtown, Little Washington. Okay, where would that be? Well, let's see. We talked about the early community of black families in the Cornwall Road area, and then, which is down here. And then in the Kingswood area here, Dutchess Village was over here, Evans Road here. So we're back into town here. This was another area where black families settled in the late 1800s. Now, we haven't uncovered who sold land along Cornwall Road yet. We haven't gone that deep into the Register of Deeds. But we do know that J.P.H. Adams and his wife Cora sold land around North Academy Street to blacks who were looking for a foot, just a foot up on the property run there. So we talked about Boyd, Farrell, and Johnson Street up there in the Kingswood Elementary School, but there were other white citizens in town who owned land in Cary and who sold that land, some of that land, to black families. Rufus Jones, who actually, he and his family owned the original Cary High School back in the 1870s and on. There was Frank Page, who sold land. Also, Helen Walker, who were the owners of the Page Walker Hotel, the historic railroad hotel across the tracks. They had land in that general area. They owned the hotel, but they also owned 26 acres of land along Chatham Street and up Walker Street, so in that general area. We're back to Elva Templeton's map again. So if you see, we are right here outside the park. And this is where the park is. And if you'll notice, it was a park a long time ago. It was owned by a man named Ben Savage, and hopefully his name is somewhere in the park right now. But he had a nursery in the park, like a garden center nursery in the park. So if you go kitty corner, let me get my bearings, that way, out that corner, and go across Park Street, Walker Street, Hunter Street, in that area, it was called Little Washington, or sometimes referred to as Frogtown. So how did they get those names? Well, we don't really know, but we do know that it could have been named after Washington, which is a town in eastern North Carolina. It's called Little Washington. I mean, that's how I grew up knowing it was Little Washington. Or Original. It was also called Original Washington because it was the very first town in the United States to be named after our first president. He wasn't president then, George Washington. It was named after him in 1776. I mean, I think that's really cool. So it may or may not have any relation to that story, but Frogtown might have gotten the name because it was the lowest part of an area. There was a creek that ran through there. I mean, that water's being mitigated now, but my dad tells me that there used to be a creek that ran along there. There was a blacksmith down in that area, and so they needed water. There was a creek that ran, and probably frogs multiplied and croaked their little hearts out down there. So that was probably, maybe that's why it was named Frogtown. Well, there aren't any streets in this area named for the black families. Walker Street was named for Jacob and Helen Walker, who had the Page Walker Hotel. Hunter Street was the name of one of their grandchildren, was their 4 grandchildren. And Waldo Street was named for Dr. Samuel Waldo, who lived in the area. But I wanted to point out a couple of the family names that I know of in that area. First of all, you'll notice the name of Willis Cotton. And Bethania, remember Bethania Simmons was a Cotton. So here's Willis Cotton here, and he was the patriarch of the family. He was very active in civic life around Cary. His son Clarence provided a place for people to gather on Saturday or Sunday evening in the basement of his home. He had a jukebox and sold sundries, kind of like the boys' club on the other side of town. So there were other Cottons in the area, Lonnie and Evelina Cotton, and they lived nearby, and they were responsible for picking up the mail with a cart at the railroad depot and transporting it to the post office. So they would, my dad remembers seeing them do that by cart. My dad was 96 when he died last year. So he has those memories of early Cary. He was born and grew up here. So he remembers Lonnie and Evelina Cotton. But Evelina had the sometimes difficult job of delivering the telegrams that would come into the railroad, Western Union, and she would deliver them to families. And sometimes it was very difficult, especially during the war, when people were dying. So sometimes people knew if they saw Evelina coming with a telegram, it might not be good news. So that was a very difficult thing for her to do. But beginning in about 1860, another long-time Cary black family, the Rogers family, lived in the same area. They had a really large lot on East Park Street, and East Park Street just runs right down there at the end of the park. They were one of the earliest black landowners in all of Cary, and the Stroud and Wood families were also others who owned land in that area. We've done, the Friends of the Page Walker have done research on all these families. A lot of them are included, a snippet of their history is included in the brochures that we have today, so be sure to pick up one. So, where have we been today? We started down here on Cornwall Road. We went up here to talk about the churches and the school a little bit. We went over here to Dutchess Village, up to Evans Road, and then we ended up here, kind of like right in the backyard here. So we've kind of come to the end of our overview. We have just barely scratched the surface of African American street names, churches, schools, residential areas. We've been around and about Cary today with each other. I hope it's given you a little bit of insight into just a little bit that we've learned about African American history and the Friends of the Page Walker. It really tells a compelling story of people, in many cases, coming out of being enslaved, staying in Cary, or coming to Cary, buying land, making an impact on our Cary community. We really hope that just broadens your perspective of Cary history. I think what we as the Friends are trying to do is tell a fuller story of the history that has gone on here. So, with that in mind, we welcome any information, any photos, and if there were any photos in this presentation that you want updated, if the family members are in the room and they want to update their photos, we're happy to update your photos. But we just want to be able to expand our knowledge of the black community in Cary's history. Now, if you know of people who couldn't come here today and might want to see this and see the slides more clearly, friend Michael Rubis there has been video recording this, and our tech guru, who is not in town, takes the video and then he overlays my slides onto the video so that you can see them more clearly. So he does a really good job, and we will post that on our YouTube channel. And we are also going to reprise this program in February at the Page Walker. It's going to be on Tuesday, February the 11th. It'll be out on social media to advertise it, but the Page Walker is a larger venue. It's an evening presentation, so if you can come out for that, I know some people who might want to see it then it'll be available then. And I'm going to make a plug for Michael, because next month, our final presentation in this series is on Sunday, August 18th at 2 p.m. right here in this room for more history on the streets of Cary. He's going to talk about some that aren't in downtown. He'll go into more of the history of Charlie Holloman and Holloman Street and that family, and others that are a little bit farther afield that we didn't cover in the first presentation. So be sure to return for that. Get a brochure, and I would welcome any comments or questions that you have at this time. That's all I've got for today. Any comments or questions?